The train's whistle tore through the horizon like a cry from a wounded beast. Smoke curled upward, smudging the pale sky above the parched valley. Near the tracks, a young Apache woman stood with her shawl drawn tight, the color of dusk against her skin. Her satchel was light, just a crust of bread, a ribbon, and a letter she couldn't read. Dust clung to her bare ankles, but she didn't brush it away. She had learned to stand still when the world pushed past her. In town, they called her Morning Rain, though few said it kindly. She had lived on the edge of the settlement since the soldiers burned her village 3 winters ago. She stitched shirts for cowhands who never met her eyes, cleaned floors that were swept again the moment she left. Her smile, when it appeared, was small, cautious, as if afraid of being seen. Today, she waited for a train she couldn't board, hoping that someone might need another pair of hands at the next station down the line. The conductor had laughed when she asked for passage, told her the railroad wasn't charity. His words struck harder than his tone. She nodded, stepped aside, and waited in silence as the steam gathered around her like a fog of shame. Behind her, a horse's hooves drummed the earth, steady, unhurried, belonging to a man who had nothing left to chase. Cole Anders reined in his stallion near the platform, dust rising in a golden halo around them. He was 34, shoulders broad from years of breaking wild horses, his face rough-hewn by sun and sorrow. The townsfolk said he'd buried his heart alongside his wife on the North Ridge, and that nothing living could move him since. He dismounted without a glance toward Morning Rain, tipping his hat to the station master instead. She felt the ground tremble faintly beneath her feet as his boots struck the dirt. He walked past her like she was air, his spurs whispering with each step. For a moment, she looked at him. The line of his jaw, the quiet pride in the way he carried pain like a secret. And then she looked away. The whistle sounded again, sharper this time. A boy dropped a crate, chickens scattered, and the air filled with feathers and grit. Cole helped steady the freight wagon, barking orders to the workers. Morning Rain tried to edge closer to the departing train, clutching her satchel tighter. The conductor blocked her with an impatient hand. "No ticket, no seat," he said. She tried to speak, but her voice caught. He turned from her before she could explain. Cole saw the exchange, though he pretended not to. It wasn't his business, not his fight. He was a man who'd spent years learning not to care about what couldn't be changed. Still, as he led his horse toward the water trough, he felt something unsettled within him, a faint guilt, or maybe recognition. She reminded him of the mare he'd once found tangled in barbed wire, standing quiet though the pain ran deep. When the train finally lurched forward, the platform filled with sound, iron grinding, voices calling out goodbyes, wind whipping through coats. Morning Rain stepped back, head bowed. She would try again another day. Then came the shout. Someone down the tracks waved a red flag, screaming about the coupling jammed loose between cars. The engineer yanked the brakes, but the slope was too steep. The wheels shrieked, metal against metal. The train began to slide, heavy as a wounded bull. Cole dropped the reins. His stallion reared, eyes wide, nostrils flaring. Without a thought, the rancher vaulted into the saddle and spurred forward, dust exploding behind him. Morning Rain froze where she stood, heart pounding as the train thundered closer. She saw him lean low, almost parallel to the horse's neck, a blur of muscle and courage. He reached the moving cars, swung from the saddle, and cut the binding line between the runaway front and the rear half carrying passengers. A blast of steam and fire roared around him. The world narrowed to the scream of wheels and the pounding of hooves. Then silence, sudden and absolute. The last car jolted to a stop mere yards from a cliff. The air smelled of metal and burned oil. The dust drifted down like ash. Morning Rain's knees buckled and she ran, barefoot, unthinking, toward the fallen man near the tracks. His hat lay crushed beside him, his shirt torn, a shallow cut streaking his temple. His horse stood nearby, trembling but unharmed. She knelt beside him, trembling too. Her hands brushed the dirt from his face. He stirred, eyes fluttering open, catching her gaze before the rest of the world returned. For a heartbeat, they stared, two strangers bound by the same breath. He tried to sit up, wincing. The others, they safe? She nodded, voice soft as wind. You saved them. He gave a faint, weary smile. Good. Behind them, townsfolk gathered, murmuring his name, calling him hero. But Morning Rain stayed where she was, kneeling beside the man who had turned toward danger instead of away. When the sheriff reached them, she stepped back, letting them lift him to his feet. He didn't look at her again, not then. Later, as the crowd dispersed and the damaged cars were cleared, she lingered by the edge of the tracks. The sun was setting, gold bleeding into crimson over the hills. She watched him mount his stallion again, slower this time, his hand gripping the saddle horn for balance. He glanced toward her briefly, as if uncertain whether she was real or something imagined in the heat and smoke. She met his eyes once more, then turned away, walking into the dying light. That night, the saloon echoed with laughter and exaggeration. Men slapped Cole's back, women offered whiskey, and the story of the rancher who stopped a train grew wilder with each retelling. They said even the angels must have paused to watch. Someone joked that maybe he'd done it to impress a woman, and the room erupted. Cole said nothing. He stared at the lamplight glinting off his glass, seeing not flames, but eyes the color of wet earth after rain. Outside, the wind carried the scent of iron and wild sage. Morning Rain walked alone down the dirt road toward her small cabin, the world hushed except for the far-off cry of coyotes. She didn't know why her chest felt so heavy or why her steps faltered as she looked back toward the distant ranch lights. Something had shifted, small, invisible, yet certain as the tide. And as the moon climbed above the ridges, she whispered to the night that she would not forget the man who rode against the train. She didn't know it yet, but somewhere beyond the hills, that same man couldn't sleep, haunted by the memory of a woman who had looked at him as if he were worth saving too. Rain swept across Red Bluff Valley 3 days after the train nearly derailed. The land drank greedily, and the river swelled, curling through the grasslands like a silver serpent. Cole Anders rode out in it anyway, ignoring the ache in his ribs. The townsfolk had praised him, offered whiskey and applause, but he'd turned from it all. The noise of gratitude never sat right with him. He wanted quiet, just the wind, the rhythm of hooves, and the sound of his own thoughts, which lately had begun to feel too crowded. He dismounted by the river, letting his horse drink. The stallion's legs still trembled when he shifted weight. The limp was faint but stubborn. Cole crouched beside him, rubbing the tendon gently. That was when he noticed the small clay jar tied to the fence post. Inside was a thick green salve and a sprig of sage bound with thread. No note, no name. But he knew. Morning Rain had come. He looked toward the line of cottonwoods along the far bank, half expecting her to be there, half hoping she wasn't. She wasn't. The rain softened into mist, and for a long while he just stood there, jar in hand, heart strangely restless. The next morning, she came again. He saw her from the porch, dark hair braided, shawl damp with dew, walking barefoot as if the earth itself was her kin. She carried a small basket and set it on his gatepost before turning to leave. He called out, voice rough from disuse, "You can come closer." She hesitated, then stepped forward. The air between them felt tender, like something that could shatter if either breathed too hard. "You left this," he said, holding up the jar. She nodded. "The balm eases pain. For your horse. The herb is for the fever." He studied her face, the calm in her eyes, the curve of exhaustion beneath them. "You could have just told me. You wouldn't have listened." A faint smile tugged at his mouth despite himself. She was right. He wasn't used to being helped. After that, she came often. Sometimes she brought herbs or mended gear left on his fence. Sometimes she said nothing at all, just lingered while he worked. The days slid gently into one another, slow as river stones smoothing underwater. He began to notice things, the way her voice dropped soft when she spoke to the horses, the way she hummed songs with no words, the way the air seemed easier to breathe when she was near. There was no sudden lightning between them, only the slow burn of a fire that refused to die out. One evening, as twilight poured like honey across the valley, he found her standing by the corral. The horses had gathered near her, calm, their eyes reflecting the fading light. "You've got a gift," he said quietly. She shrugged. "They just listen when you don't order them to." He leaned against the post, watching her fingers trace a horse's mane. "That's more than most folks ever learn." She looked at him, her gaze steady. "And you? Do you always ride toward danger?" He gave a dry laugh. "Not always. But sometimes it's the only way to stop what's coming." Her eyes softened. "Or to forget what already came." He didn't answer. The wind moved between them like a sigh. In the days that followed, rumors spread through town. The saloon keeper's wife saw them riding together near the river. The blacksmith claimed he saw her walking into Cole's barn at dusk. The talk turned sour, whispers about shame, about a man forgetting his kind. Cole tried to ignore it, but words have a way of finding their mark. When she didn't appear for 3 days, he told himself she was just busy, that she'd return. But the 4th morning came, and the gatepost was empty. He saddled his horse, rode into town, and felt the air turn colder with each passing face. The sheriff met him outside the general store. "Looking for your little friend?" he asked, tone caught between mockery and pity. Cole's jaw tightened. "You seen her. She's at the jailhouse. Someone accused her of stealing a locket from Miss Alden's counter." "That's a lie." The sheriff shrugged. "Maybe. But truth don't weigh much against fear, does it? She's leaving on the morning train. Safer that way." Cole didn't speak. He just turned his horse toward the station, the world narrowing into a tunnel of dust and heartbeat. Night fell heavy. He waited near the platform, hidden behind the freight crates, rain dripping from the brim of his hat. Morning Rain sat on a bench under guard, wrists bound loosely with rope, her satchel beside her. Her face was calm, too calm. When the sheriff walked away to smoke, Cole stepped out of the shadows. She looked up, startled, then shook her head slightly. "You shouldn't be here. I can't let them send you off like this. It's better this way. I bring trouble." He crouched before her, voice low but fierce. "You bring peace, and they don't know what to do with it." Her eyes filled, not with tears, but with something deeper, a tiredness older than her years. "You'll lose everything if you stand beside me." "I already lost everything once," he said. "This time I choose what I keep." Before she could answer, the whistle blew. The train shuddered forward, hissing, impatient. The sheriff returned, motioning for her to rise. Cole's heartbeat roared in his ears. He knew what he was about to do long before he did it. He swung into the saddle and spurred his stallion down the length of the tracks. The engine screamed, the crowd gasped. He leaned low, wind tearing at his coat. The horse's hooves struck sparks off the gravel as they raced beside the moving train. When he reached the front, he grabbed the signal flag from the side rail and waved it furiously. The engineer, seeing the frantic red flash, yanked the brakes. Steam erupted. Metal shrieked. The train slowed, stopped. The sheriff cursed, running toward him. Passengers poured out in confusion. Cole turned, breath ragged, face streaked with rain and grit. Morning Rain stepped down from a last car, ropes gone, satchel clutched to her chest. For a long, breathless moment, no one moved. Then she walked toward him, slow and deliberate, until she stood an arm's length away. The town watched in silence. Cole met her eyes, voice raw. "You're not leaving." Her answer came soft but unshakable. "Then neither are you." The wind carried her words across the platform, scattering them into the crowd like seeds. The sheriff's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. The train hissed again, its breath mingling with the storm. And as it pulled away empty, Cole realized the thing he'd stopped wasn't just a train, it was the life he'd been running from. The morning after the train stopped for her, the town woke in a silence thick enough to touch. The storm had passed, leaving behind puddles that mirrored the gray sky. Cole stood on his porch, watching the fog drift low over the valley. His horse grazed nearby, the same stallion that had raced beside the iron beast the night before. Every muscle in Cole's body ached, but his heart carried a different pain, one that felt both heavy and holy. He knew what he'd done couldn't be undone. He'd crossed a line the town had drawn long before either of them was born. By noon, word had spread to every doorstep and every saloon. The rancher who stopped the train wasn't a hero anymore. He was a fool, they said, a man bewitched by an Apache woman. The word carried venom, sharpened by fear. He ignored it, though it followed him like a shadow. When he rode into town to buy supplies, the blacksmith turned his back. The preacher's wife crossed the street. Even the children stared, unsure whether to smile or spit. Morning rain met him by the river that evening, the same place where kindness had first taken root between them. She looked weary but unbroken, the faint glimmer of defiance in her dark eyes. The water shimmered behind her, gold and blue in the dying light. She wore no shawl, only a plain cotton dress that clung to her from the damp. "They hate you now," she said quietly. "They hated me before," he replied. "Now they've just found a reason to say it out loud." Her gaze flickered toward the town's direction. "You should let me go. You've done enough." He shook his head. "Not enough to make them see." She smiled sadly. "You can't teach people who refuse to look." "Maybe not," he said, "but I can choose what I see." The river caught the light between them, turning it into liquid fire. Neither spoke for a long time. She stepped closer then, slow, uncertain. The space that had once been made of fear became something softer. He reached for her hand, his touch rough, reverent. "I don't know what this is," he murmured. "It's something alive," she whispered back. "That's more than most things here." A hawk cried overhead, and the sound carried across the valley like a benediction. Days passed. The town cooled into whispers rather than shouts, but their eyes still burned with judgment. Cole worked his ranch alone now. Most of his hands had left, claiming better wages elsewhere. Morning rain helped when she could, feeding the horses, mending harnesses, bringing life back to the house that had long felt empty. They spoke little of love, but it filled the air between them nonetheless. In her presence, his silences no longer felt like walls, but like rest. Yet peace, in the West, never lasted long. One morning, Cole rode into town for feed. A crowd had gathered outside the saloon, faces drawn tight with something darker than gossip. The sheriff saw him first and stepped forward, hand resting near his revolver. "Cole," he began, tone heavy. "There's talk again. Some say the railroad wants compensation for the train delay. Others say they'll send marshals if you don't make amends." Cole's eyes narrowed. "They can come talk to me themselves." The sheriff's gaze softened with something almost like pity. "You're a good man, but good don't count for much when money's involved. Maybe it'd be easier if she weren't around." The words struck like a whip. Cole's voice was low, steady. "She stays." The sheriff nodded once, resigned. "Then you'd better be ready for what comes." That night, the ranch burned. Flames roared through the barn before anyone could reach it. Horses screamed, smoke twisting into the sky like a living thing. Cole and Morning Rain fought the blaze with buckets and wet blankets until the roof collapsed. By dawn, only the stone chimney stood. When the fire finally died, she sank to her knees in the ash, face streaked with soot and tears. "They won't stop," she said. "They'll take everything." He knelt beside her, gripping her shoulders. "Then let them. What matters isn't made of wood." "But you loved this place," she whispered. "I loved it because it gave me something to lose." He wiped the soot from her cheek, and for the first time since the fire began, she smiled. It was small, trembling, but real. They rebuilt slowly. Neighbors who once turned away began to help in secret, an old widow bringing bread, a boy offering nails. The town's cruelty, once loud, grew quieter when faced with their endurance. Love, it seemed, had the patience of the earth itself. Weeks later, on a mild spring morning, the preacher arrived. His hat was in his hands, eyes uncertain. Cole and Morning Rain stood by the half-finished fence, their fingers laced without shame. "I've been thinking," the preacher said softly, "about grace, about what it means to live it, not just preach it." Cole waited, silent. "I don't believe the Lord makes mistakes," the preacher continued. "Maybe he meant for this to happen, for people to see what love looks like when it costs something." Morning Rain's eyes glistened. "Do you mean to bless us?" He nodded, hesitant but sincere. "If you'll have me." They were wed by the river that evening. No guests, no gowns, no gold. Only wind through the grass and the song of the water. She wore a simple braid, and he, a clean shirt still smelling faintly of smoke. When he spoke his vow, his voice cracked. "You're my dawn after the storm." Her reply was a whisper. "And you are the fire that did not destroy me." The sun dipped below the ridges, leaving the world painted in amber and rose. They stood together in the quiet, hands bound by a thin cord of braided grass, a tradition of her people, a promise of his heart. That night, the valley slept in peace for the first time in months. And yet, as the moon rose, Cole woke from a dream that felt too real. The sound of another whistle far off in the distance, the echo of iron wheels turning again. He stepped outside, the cool air biting at his lungs. The horizon glowed faintly with light, not fire, but something like it. Morning rain joined him, her hand finding his. "Another train?" she asked softly. He nodded, eyes on the faraway shimmer. Or maybe a sign. They stood together in silence, the sound growing louder, steady, unstoppable. But this time, there was no fear. Only the quiet knowing that whatever came next, they would face it as one. And as the wind carried the whistle's cry through the valley, it didn't sound like warning anymore. It sounded like blessing.